Okay, we're live, Jonathan.
Is anybody else logged in?
We're all on here. What do we need for a quorum, Jonathan?
That actually, I'm waiting for, trying to see who that is speaking.
Ralph Machin.
For a quorum, I believe it's 4. I'm not a voting member.
Well, I think we have 4 here.
Okay.
Yes, I think we should be good.
Okay. I guess I should call the meeting to order. This is July 28th, Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. in the third quarter meeting of the Tax Incentive Review Committee of the City of Youngstown. I think we'll start with the Human Relations Commission's update. Is that you, Jonathan?
Okay. Just want to first off, thank everybody for making time in their busy schedules to join us for this meeting. We went to the quarterly format, and of course, our original scheduled date for that first quarter meeting was March 23rd, I believe. And that's when the pandemic really started to become prominent and a lot of businesses were shutting down. So I'm glad that we are able to at least get this third quarter meeting in, but this is going to focus more so on strategic planning for the remainder of this year plus 2021. And as for the human relations update, the workforce database, I've been working with Rick Alcorn and Rick Deek on actually kind of updating the workforce database and how I interact with it and am able to update it. So instead of having to go to one central location to update the database and add people in, I can do it from anywhere now. So that's just wanted to give credit where credit's due. Rick Alcorn, Rick Deek have been putting in a lot of work to update that workforce database, and it's really streamlined the process of getting people in. And I believe it's going to be a vital tool for the remainder of this year and going forward. With the workforce database, I'm working with the Family Self-Sufficiency Program over at YMHA and trying to enroll their 200 plus members. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program helps those that are receiving public assistance get off of public assistance, find better jobs, find better educational opportunities, training opportunities, things of that nature. So we are working with them to get those members of that FSS program into our database, and therefore they can benefit from the companies that are receiving tax abatements and other incentives and those job opportunities. A letter will be going out to our companies that are receiving abatements and other incentives from the city to really update them on what we're doing and how we are going to further enforce the penalties if companies aren't hiring the way that they are supposed to. Resources for monitoring. Once again, once the pandemic became prominent, a lot of our resources, such as the school systems, the technical centers, all shut down. So we weren't able to really reach out to them, utilize them to work with the businesses. And a lot of our businesses were also either shut down or running on skeleton crews. So we weren't really able to do that outreach effort. For now that things are starting to ramp back up, we are going to be reaching out to those resources once again and those businesses to start making those connections and try to make up for that lost time from March until today. That's all I have for the Human Relations Commission update. If anybody has any questions, I welcome them.
Hearing no questions, let's move on to the next agenda item, the updates in the CPED.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are currently wrapping up the collection of all of the data for the annual report that we typically provide to the council for review in determining the progress of our companies and making recommendations of whether those abatements will be continued or not. There was a undefined delay or postponements from the state of Ohio in terms of requiring the filing of the report because of COVID. I think they were just sympathetic to what businesses were going through at that time, and some of them weren't fully operating. So we have picked that back up. We started again contacting businesses and reminding them of their reports late May, or I'm sorry, probably mid-June. And we got the last report in, I believe, last week. So the CPA firm will be compiling all of that data. We expect them as part of the scope of their project to make sure that there aren't any inconsistencies with the reporting and that it makes sense. Then they'll file that with the state of Ohio. And once that's filed, then we'll get the actual annual reports that we'll present to Tax Incentive Review Council. So my guess is we're probably looking at maybe 2 to 3 weeks out before we are reaching out back to you to schedule a meeting so that we can have our annual meeting. As we were following up with the companies to remind them of the reports, I use that as an opportunity to also engage with the businesses to find out how things are going with COVID. And as expected, a lot of them had reduced their operations. They were all still operating, but because of the slowdown in their production and the demand, it's just anticipated, and you won't see that necessarily in this report, but Tax Incentive Review Council will just need to be mindful of future reports where this particular economic downturn how it will affect businesses in terms of their employees.
Ralph, can I ask a question through your chair?
Absolutely.
Karen, is it possible, because this is going to be us reviewing the 19 data, and given that there's been dilemmas with the current calendar year, is it possible next year that the reporting can get done sooner so that we can actually get a better understanding of what those businesses had encountered under the COVID cloud, instead of having to wait till the third quarter to evaluate them? Because it seems like, given the timing of getting these reports, and I know that Councilman Oliver had some reservations about how do we hold them more accountable if we're already reviewing 9 to 10 months prior historical information, and now we're already deep into the new calendar year. Is it something that we can accomplish next year on a much shorter timeline?
We can revisit the timeline with the CPA. Some of the timing is based on when the state's portal opens up for reporting, and that happens in March. Unfortunately, that also runs with the tax season with our CPA. So there is a point where they kind of take a break in being able to go back to our data and doing the necessary reviews that are required. But we certainly can push that up. I just don't know how soon, but I will have that conversation with them.
Thanks.
Ralph, I gotta
Yes, sir.
do the chair.
Yes, sir.
Kind of to Cal's point a little bit. Great suggestion, Cal, by the way. We should have data from the last tax incentive review decision-making process up until the first quarter of this year to kind of tell us what the status was before COVID hit. And if these companies were in compliance or headed towards compliance in order to keep their tax abatements. That's my assumption. Question is, have the companies been made prepared at all, or do they understand the seriousness that they could potentially be losing their tax abatements if not in compliance?
So as we are finalizing our agreements moving forward, and this has been for the last 2 or 3 years, rather than forwarding the agreement and having the companies sign off on the agreement, we have had one-on-one meetings and went through the terms so that they understood exactly what was anticipated with them. It's not buried in the language. They are acknowledging it as we're signing off on those agreements. We also, at the time, had a compliance monitor who was regularly checking in with businesses, reminding them of their obligations, getting feedback on whether they were currently hiring, and reminding them of the process for posting jobs. So there was some more ongoing engagement that now, just because of staffing and the inability for there to be the continual contact that we were able to have when we had staffing, that's not occurring. But the companies that were listed as, I think, they had flags that Jonathan had listed, we did contact them, let them know that there were some concerns about their numbers, that they were falling short, and they are absolutely on notice that this is being scrutinized and that we will be looking for information and some explanation of what's happening. What I can tell you is MS Consultants specifically, when we looked through those numbers, there was no distinction in the job creation that was committed to in the reports in terms of what were temporary positions and what were full-time positions. In the agreement, they listed positions that were temporary and jobs that were going to be created as a result of construction. So that number didn't accurately reflect the number of permanent positions that were to be hired. Once we went through that and took into account what was temporary and what was permanent, they were within the scope of what they were, what they had committed to do. So that particular one, that was just lost in translation with the report. But the other ones, we had that conversation and they have been put on notice.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sharon?
Yes, so Mr. Meacham, this is Ron Shadd from the Board of Ed. My question is, when Ms. Woodbury talks about putting them on notice, does that notice come with a time frame to become compliant?
No, I don't provide them with a time frame to become compliant. They're reminded of what the job creation numbers are. And at that point, it's just a matter of them reporting what those numbers are. And, you know, they're made aware that the council will be meeting annually. And at that time, the information is presented and either the council feels that it's acceptable or it's not. So the time frame is for the next report that they submit and the date that the council meets.
Any other questions for Sharon? Yes, sir,
Yeah,
John?
one more question through the chair.
Go
So, and I guess this is for either Sharon or Jonathan. So do the companies seem, in your opinion, as though they get the seriousness of it and they are becoming in compliance, or does it seem like at the end of the year we're going to have the same old song and dance and no additional? I know this year is hard because of the pandemic, but I also don't want that to be the overall reason for why people weren't able to get in compliance if the numbers reflect towards the ending of the last cycle to the beginning of the year that it was still the same. But does it seem like they're getting into compliance, or does it seem like it's going to be the same thing at the end of the year and we're going to end up stripping away tax abatements?
Through the chair.
Through the chair.
Please, Sharon first.
So when I've had the conversations with the companies, it's primarily about their job creation numbers in general. When we're talking about the city residents component and the minorities component, again, that's where Jonathan steps in, because the way that we move forward with this is that there is some type of programming or assistance to help with recruitment and some understanding of what the challenges are, because it's a continual kind of relationship in being able to work with them and get the numbers where they need to be in terms of minority hiring. And so, you know, from some of the things that Jonathan's done with the database and the job fairs, that's when the opportunities come for them to be able to reach those numbers. When I'm talking to them about their numbers in general, what I can tell you is they don't seem to be easily surmountable obstacles in terms of bringing their numbers up in general, because either it's a function of the market and they just can't fabricate or generate business to get where they need to be in terms of the job creation. So we can hear what their challenges are, but I don't know that they're going to just boost those numbers because they need to be. There are some real issues in terms of factors that have gotten their numbers to where they need to be. They haven't picked up the revenue that they thought they were going to. And in some cases, it's just been a challenge of workforce in general. So I have referred them to Ohio Means Jobs in terms of trying to help with recruiting. But some of the numbers that I think you probably see reflected in the reports, what they find is that there may be a boost in the number of employees that are hired for that particular year. We break it down in terms of what their net gain or loss is, and also how many employees they hired that particular year. They may have hired 15 or 20 employees, and I'm just throwing a number out there. I'm not saying anyone in particular. They may have hired that number of employees, but the turnover is not helping them maintain that. And I can think of one company in particular. Their particular challenge was that it was a very physical position. It required someone who would be willing to put in the physical exertion that was required. And they just couldn't get employees to stick it out. They typically lost them right around that 6 to 8 week timeframe where they just stopped showing up for work. And so they had challenges with that. Those are things that I don't know that they're going to have a solution to. And so it's just a matter of, is it acceptable? Is it not acceptable? And making a decision based on the information that's provided.
Thank you.
Follow.
Yes, sir.
So, okay, I won't, I mean, for the most part, the public, myself, probably won't be able to accept that you couldn't find people to work a physical job. I mean, because there's plenty of people out there that will, so that can't be an acceptable reason why you couldn't fill those positions, in my opinion. So would it seem that the companies are, because the average company, if you got large orders coming for the next year, you're requesting a tax abatement, you're saying, I'm going to need to staff up my company by 40 positions. You should have the business already on deck to be able to fill those positions, in my opinion. If you get the tax abatement and you're going to fulfill those orders and you don't come anywhere close to fulfilling those positions, then it would seem that you just blew smoke in order to get this tax abatement from the city. And for that reason, your tax abatement should be taken away. So is that what we're seeing? Is a lot of companies are coming before the city and they're just giving the numbers that they think are going to help them get these abatements? Or is there any way to track or vet or see their income and business for the year ahead to make sure that, you know, everybody's doing their due diligence? But so during this process, at the end of the day, there's no excuse. You know what I mean?
I do. I understand exactly what you're saying, Councilman. So the projects that we're talking about, they are pretty substantial in size. So we have a bank that's involved and they're looking at projections. Sometimes the investment is that they're purchasing equipment that they anticipate will make them more productive. Sometimes it's the function of a contract. It depends on what their particular basis is for the expansion. But it's typically still a projection out of what's trending and what they see. Not always contracts they're lined up. Now that has happened where, you know, they've got a contract and they need to fulfill. But I don't think that we can across the board say that that circumstance is going to be the case for every business. There are some that are truly a function of the economy. We see that in gas and oil exploration. That's market driven. That's the commodity at that time and whether the demand picked up or went down. And, you know, that's an example, but, you know, some of them really do fluctuate based on what's happening in the economy, and they just can't predict that. Again, I understand what you're saying, and you may find that what we're getting from them is not, you know, sufficient enough, and it's, you know, it's just a decision that has to be made at that point of whether you're just going to rescind the abatement or not.
Councilman, is that responsive?
Yes, thank you.
Jonathan, did you have something, sir?
Yes, I just wanted to add, just to piggyback off of what Councilman Oliver was saying, as far as are the companies taking this seriously as far as what the penalties and ramifications can be? As far as my portion goes, and which Sharon touched on, I'm looking at the diversity of who you're hiring. Are you hiring those city residents? And as far as the penalties go, if those numbers don't start to add up, I'm going to start making the recommendation to take those incentives away. So whether or not you understand, I'm going to give you enough opportunity to use the database, use our job fairs, which I'll talk about a little bit further in the agenda, use our resources. If you do not utilize those and the numbers don't add up, whether you take it seriously or not, I'm looking to take away those incentives. That's my stance on it.
So if I could also, through the chair.
Please. Yes.
I can also add that, you know, we've had some conversations about the language in our agreements. Throughout the agreements, there are, in terms of job creation, where we'll say best efforts for hiring and retention and things of that nature. I did review, and I have to still preface this with saying that there is language that we use as a template from the state, and there has been this, I think, question of what the city is permitted to do in terms of rescinding an abatement on the basis of race, whether if they've met a number or what we, kind of prescribed as what we want to see. I did bring that up to the law department after the Tax Incentive Review Council meeting that we had, and asking that to be reviewed. And I don't know that there's ever been any really determination on how we move forward in the case of where we have a business that they committed to X amount of jobs, if they're fulfilling that issue, but then the other part of it is that they're falling short on the minority. Then we have minorities or female or male based, then we have to include in that language specifics in terms of the commitments of the hiring for minorities and the hiring of females, and be comfortable with it in the law department saying that this is the language that you can use. Now, what I have done is looked at the EEO statement, and when we discuss whether they're complying or not, requiring and modifying the agreement, requiring that they do participate, and it's a matter of them being compliant or not if they don't participate by participating in the job fairs. Or I kept it general because I know that there are other programs that come to be that we're putting together to help with that recruitment, but that they are required to participate, work with Jonathan and the programs that the city has put together to help recruit, so that there is, they have a path of being able to identify qualified minorities or women in that position. So that's some language that we tweaked and made that part of the compliance, that they have to participate with the programs. And so that's with the new agreements that are moving forward.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and Councilman Oliver, I know that you're aware of it, that we have been lately working with having some specific terms that they've agreed to.
Breaking up real bad on my end, Sharon.
Okay. Through the chair.
Is Sharon done, or yes, please? It's unknown caller. Who is it, please?
This is. I think this is Bob Bush.
Oh, Mr. Bush, how are you, sir?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good. Quick couple of comments, observations. I don't know the history, but that's when you start pulling abatements, and I'm not opposed to it totally, that's a two-edged sword. So there would be a lot of pressure on the administration not to do that also. But I just had the thought, since this is tax incentive, and I know it would be a tax keeping and a figure keeping nightmare, what if you incentivize the activity on the front end, meaning as I hit my 10 employees, that say 20% or 30% comes in. As I hit my next 15, that 20 or 30% comes in. That way, if my number is 60 and I hit, and the best I could do with my best intentions is 40, then that may be an 80% abatement, just rounding it off, versus 100%, because that's what my incentive merits. That way also, I think there's some fairness in that, as Sharon talked about the oil industry or the heavy industries where folks just will not last. If I made a sincere effort, you can validate that, and I can receive some incentive help and not look like I sculpt the program, because all my efforts would be known by the committee. You give 100%, and I'm just having difficulties getting folks to show up for that type of work or to stay long term. So I'm not punished. My efforts are acknowledged, yet and still the shortfall is also acknowledged because it's not 100%, because somehow it's prorated to what my numbers represent on the front end. I know that would probably be a bookkeeping nightmare, but that may do away with some of that conversation of pulling my total abatement if indeed I made a real effort and fell short, or if indeed I made no effort and fall short. I'm not going to get to that 100% anyway, because it's going to be rated to my efforts.
Through the chair.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Bush, I would greatly agree with your suggestion. That's kind of what came up in the Business Journal interview we did a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
Was to, put the incentive on the front end. So as you meet those goals, then you get your, the abatement, rather than, just giving it to you automatically and then you falling short like it doesn't matter. So I would greatly agree with that as one of the tools to put in our tool belt.
Thank you. Sharon, were you able to rejoin us or not? I don't see her. Jonathan, would you like
Yes,
to? Oh, Sharon on?
I'm on the phone. I had to join through my phone. My internet
see you
connection
now.
is down.
Please go ahead. Sharon, do you have a response?
I didn't hear what was said. I just got in, so I'm not. Can whoever just spoke, can you just repeat what was said?
Mr. Bush?
Sharon, this is Bob Bush. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
What I was saying is maybe give some thought, and I acknowledge it may be a bookkeeping nightmare, that you incentivize the efforts on the front end, meaning rather than give me 100% out the door and a 50% 50 employee commitment, as I hit benchmarks, my tax abatement would increase based on those benchmarks. And I think it becomes an equity thing. If I make a sincere effort and hit 40, I probably won't get 100%. I may well end up with 80 or 85% abatement, and that reflects my true efforts. In those earlier comments, if I just scoff at the program once I get my 100%, well, those folks are picked up, because if you don't, you get a minimum abatement going in the door, and if you make no further effort, that's the amount of your abatement, what you got coming in the door. So maybe that could be given some thought, because I don't know what the history of the city is. What I was saying, it's very difficult for the administration to pull an abatement, because it's a two-edged sword. If I'm looking to come in legitimately for an abatement, and I see this, and I don't know the full history, I, as a business operator, may be reluctant to come in, because I figure if I get out in deep water, you're going to pull my abatement, which I'm going to truly need. But if I know that as we go and you set them out in advance, here's the guide, or here's the guidepost, I know that if I can get that 30 and maintain it, then I'm talking about a 70% abatement. That's good to go. And I can work with that and don't have to look over my shoulder that it's going to be pulled for some other reason. So I think maybe some thought can be given to that.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Sharon, a response?
Yes. So that is a great point to have a conversation about. I did start to look at how we could structure these abatements. So just so council is clear, we typically do not do 100% tax abatement. I want to say maybe once we did that with a negotiation, but across the board we'll propose 75% 10 years. And in that structure, we're always providing funding to Youngstown City Schools. They're getting a net gain in the investment that's happened with these projects. So they are seeing an incremental increase in their taxes. We've incentivized the business to invest And there's also some revenue being generated that goes to our schools and all the others who have some assessment. So now to revisit the point that you mentioned, Bob, that's a great way of looking at it. So what I did start to look at is if we could allow there to be some type of structure where we provide a 10-year projection and there be at the back end a higher level of abatement. So they still will receive in general 75% if you average it out, 75% 10-year abatement. But in this case, if we structured it where for the first 5 years, it's actually 50%. And if they've met those numbers, then they've shown that they have followed through with their commitments. Then after year 5, they're meeting their numbers. It's structured to bump up to 100% for the last 5 years. So it still averages out in the same way, 75%, but we structured it differently where they got a reduced level of abatement. If they perform, they'll get the 100% at that back end. If they don't perform, then the council has the ability to just, rescind the abatement and make their decision based on those numbers. But it's an incentive for those businesses to meet their goals because they're going to get 100% on the back end.
Right.
Through the chair.
Any other comments?
Yeah, through the chair.
Councilman?
Both Bob and Sharon, that's great. Let's see if we can put that together. Nikki, you heard it. We can start working on that. Thank you. But Bob, kind of to Bob's point about the double-edged sword, okay? So you also got to look at it as if when we give these tax abatements out to these companies and the citizens don't benefit, it's in my opinion that a huge reason why Youngstown is in the poverty state that it is because a lot of these companies are able to find people to work for their companies outside of the city. But for whatever reason, they're not able to find people within the city residents, women, and minorities, which is what's lending to a large part of our poverty, our unemployment, and ultimately the violence in the city. So it's still a double-edged sword. So I don't think I don't think whether it's the administration or this council can really get caught up in whether it's a double-edged sword on our end, because regardless, the citizens are losing if the companies don't live up to their commitment to which they got these abatements for. So we can't, the city can't take the back seat and be like, oh, we're going to let these companies take advantage of us and our citizens because another company is going to look at it like, oh, I don't want to get in deep water. The fact of the matter is the company should look at it as long as I go to Youngstown and I do what I'm supposed to do, I'm good. Mm-hmm. If I'm not trying to take advantage of the city, I'm good. If I'm living up to the citizens according to the promises that I made to get this tax abatement, then I'm good. So it doesn't matter about deep water you get in, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to do. And even if those best efforts are put forward, but if they're not, yeah, absolutely, your tax abatement should be stripped away because people counted on those jobs, the city counted on those jobs, and you basically slapped us in the face. So again, it's a double-edged sword to the citizens and to the city when these companies don't live up to those promises.
Yes, Nikki. You have a comment? Yeah, unmute. There you go.
Through the chair, thank you. When we are reviewing, and this is just a question because I'm fairly new to this process. I've only been to one meeting, and it was the annual meeting. So I don't know how or when we switch to quarterly and what the structure of the quarterly meetings are. But when we're reviewing and going over the agencies that may be underperforming, and we reach out to them? Is it in form of a letter? Is the letter from the Tax Incentive Review Committee so they know we're taking it seriously? Do we put benchmarks in place in that letter? And are we connecting them and partnering them with the resources to bring those letters, to bring those numbers up, and following through with that? If not, I think that's a process that we should put in place. And with regard to the workforce database, I'm not familiar with it. So, and I don't know how familiar the committee is, if it's something you've been using a long time, but I would definitely, Jonathan, like to have some type of tutorial so that we can help these businesses understand and work through that with them so that they know we're always on top of them and it's not going to be just an annual thing. This is a citywide problem. We don't want to make it just Sharon an economic development problem or a Jonathan problem. We need to make sure we're pulling all the resources together as a community to make these businesses successful, because it is, you know, more of an impact now because of COVID with them trying to keep those numbers up than it was before. So all of us as a community need to make sure that we have some type of structure in place that they understand what the benchmarks are, so that if they fall below, we're reviewing that quarterly and we know what the businesses are and what those challenges are. Because I've not, and again, I don't know what the structure of the quarterly meetings are, but we're not talking particulars in terms of where those benchmarks are pre-COVID and now.
Jonathan, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. The structure as far as the quarterly meetings, I can actually send that document to you. It is meant to provide all of the things that you just mentioned. Resources from the community, our technical centers, our schools, different training centers. Also, from that, we can watch which companies are actually utilizing, which ones are showing up to our meetings, which ones are utilizing those resources. And then we can make more of a sound decision going into that third quarter. Once that third quarter, we've kind of reviewed everybody and we have our fourth quarter meeting, which replaces that annual meeting. That's when we can decide, hey, you have not utilized these resources that we provided. You have not gone to the job fairs. You have not reached out to, for instance, Youngstown City Schools to see if they have a workforce to pull from. You have not utilized the workforce database to find applicants for your job openings. So once we get to that fourth quarter, we'll be able to make a sound decision. It's not a review. We've already reviewed it. So everything that you just spoke of, that was the purpose of restructuring to a quarterly format. This year's been kind of thrown off by COVID and all that, but we have even a planning session coming up here later in the agenda, just to kind of address any issues that may come up, say, if the pandemic continues. We still have to have some type of plan in place to address that. So we're not using COVID, once again, as Councilman Oliver said, using COVID as the reason for something not being done or not being monitored.
Councilman, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Jonathan, so I'm sure you're aware of the plan that Nikki and the mayor's put together with Flying High and their job readiness or preparedness. Are you going to be working closely with them to add those people that they prepare for job readiness to the workforce database so that, you know, there is a constant stream of people for these companies to be able to pull from?
I do have a meeting that is coming up with the mayor in the next month or so I'm sure that's one of the topics that we will discuss, but the workforce database itself, any group that wants to add themselves to it, so say a Flying High, or if there's some other, even if an entire church wanted to add their names to the workforce database, they can go onto youngstownohio.gov and it automatically adds them in. They fill out the form, they're in it. So we can search them. So any group such as like this program with Flying High, I'll sit down with the administration, and if that's something that they want to utilize, I'm all on board for it.
Thank you. Councilman, anything else? Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Should we move along to the next agenda point, which is examining adjustments that need to be made to the monitoring process due to COVID for the remainder of 2020 and in 2021. Jonathan, this is yours, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So what I looked at, because things, the schedule was altered because of the pandemic, what can we do from now, from the end of July to until our fourth quarter meeting, to make sure we have some type of consistent monitoring in place, make sure that we can make some sound decisions if need be, take into account what businesses were impacted by the events of today. I wanted to make sure that we're not just kind of ignoring 2020 or the review of the data, things of that nature. So this is, while it is my item, it's more of a brainstorming session for the committee as a whole to see what your thoughts are for the remainder. I can say for myself, I am reaching out to all of the companies to make them aware of what's going on as far as monitoring, as far as the workforce database, as far as what I'm going to require of them. And so I just look at it as it's an opportunity. Yes, the schedule has been altered, but we have an opportunity to reach out and start to reconnect with those companies as well.
Mr. Bush, comment?
No, sir, I'm good.
Okay. Any suggestions for Jonathan? Yes, sir.
Thank you, through the chair. So my suggestion for the remainder of 2020 is basically continue to come up with new ways to, strengthen our language, work with the companies, and make sure that everybody that can be in compliance gets in compliance, and have legitimate reasons for the ones that maybe absolutely can't get in compliance. So we know what's what for sure, rather than just being told something. I think we should put more tools in our toolbox so we don't always constantly have to deal with the tax abatement structure the way it is right now. I think we should all work with the law department to get stronger language when it comes to holding the companies accountable. We can't be afraid to scare off a company because we put it in our language that you got to hire minorities in the city. You know what I mean? You can't be scared to help the worse off citizens in your city. You know what I mean? So I think that's where our efforts should be moving forward.
Any other comments? I guess if I could comment at this point, we've been at this for a few years. I have been on this journey with you for a few years, and where we started and where we are now, I know it's slow, but it's progress. You recall a few years ago, we wanted the quarterly meetings. We had a little trouble getting those together, but quarterly meetings so we could start looking at this periodically. And the amount of examination that the companies who are participating in these benefits, Jonathan and Sharon have put them on notice that someone's looking over their shoulder now and they have to comply. So I'm encouraged by the progress, and I think adjusting the documentation as we start these incentives, that's a great point. And I think Jonathan just continue to make contact with these people and make people aware of the needs, the needs. We know the needs for employment in the city of Youngstown, but we have to make people aware that there are things out there that can go after. So that's my only addition. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Through the chair.
Who was Mr. Bush? Was that who it was? I didn't see.
No, it's Mr. Butler.
Oh, go ahead, sir. There you are. Mr. Butler.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I know that Councilman Oliver said something about stronger language. What is an example of stronger language are you proposing?
Through the chair.
Councilman?
So I think right now, basically, we can't do anything that the state doesn't do. Is that correct, Sharon? Like, we can't trump the state's repercussions for not abiding according to the tax abatement?
Through the chair.
Go ahead, Chair.
Yeah, there are certain guidelines that we're given in terms of when we can look to revoke an abatement. So that is built into the statute. That's where I discussed, I think in the past, I don't know that we talked about it in this particular meeting, that they allow for a 3-year review period. And if the companies have not averaged 75% of what their commitment is over that 3-year period, then that gives the local jurisdiction cause to reduce, rescind the tax abatement. Where it gets uncertain or gray is beyond that language, what is the city permitted to do in terms of rescinding because they don't have enough minorities on their, or city residents. I don't know what that is. That's something that we've got to have our law department review and give some guidance on. And I haven't gotten that yet. I know that in the past that's been a concern, and why the language was put together the way it is. I did look to try to tighten it up in terms of, rather than saying it has to be this hard and fast number, that there are compliance measurements, and them meeting that is by saying you have to participate in these programs. You have to work with, our EEO officer and use those tools that are at your disposal, because that's opening up the track and your ability to engage and recruit. So, just to kind of give the council an understanding of how this is structured, when we have our agreement, there is a particular attachment in terms of what their EEO policy is. There is notice that Jonathan will be reaching out to them immediately after we finalize the agreement to sit down and talk with them and understand what that hiring process looks like, what there may be some challenges with, and how those programs can work. So it's built into the agreement to have that engagement with Jonathan. Now we're building into that agreement that that's a component of compliance. If you don't do that, then you're not in compliance.
So through the chair.
Yes, please.
So thank you for that, Sharon. And that's in reference to both language and what we would do upon having to rescind the tax abatement. So my example for what the language from the city would look like upon entering into these agreements would be such as what Mr. Bush suggested earlier. At the same time, the city strengthens our agreement. When I go to these other cities and I go to the seminars, they're always throwing something out there about how their economic development department works and what they're doing for tax abatements. And it seems like in other cities, they're not scared to say, if you're hiring 100 people, 50% of these people have to be from a particular area in our city or of a particular ethnicity, as to not leave them out. Now, it seems like in our language, in our city, we're kind of scared to go ahead and put it on the table and be like, look, these are the people that are hurting the most, and these are the people that need these jobs. So what I'm saying is our language should be reflective of what's most needed in our city, because our citizens need jobs regardless of whether they're Black or white, okay? They need employment. At the same time, there's an even further put off group, which is most minorities and women who need particular attention. So what I'm saying is that language should be added to our agreement, and we shouldn't be afraid to say this is what we need and this is what we're standing for. Does that answer your question, Mr. Butler?
Yeah, kind of, but here's my concern though. We're saying we have these individuals that need the help or need the jobs, but do we have the training in specific instances that will allow them to qualify for some of the positions that are open and for the companies? Through the chair.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Through the chair, you can't, if we look through the report that we get every year, you don't have to graduate from college or have a particular skill set to get some of these labor position jobs that people
agree
that they're still not giving the Youngstown citizens. They still go outside of the city to hire these regular labor positions. So, I mean, in some instances, you could say and I don't even accept that, because Youngstown has some of the greatest skill sets of any other city around us. This is what we do here. We do machining, we do manufacturing. This is what we do. There's a lot of great people out here that are currently laid off, currently displaced, still looking for jobs, that still can't get hired by these companies because they have too much experience and they're not willing to pay them what they're worth. So you go outside the city and you find somebody else that's willing to come in and work for that wage. So across the board, these companies are coming up with different excuses not to hire Youngstown residents. That we got to find a way to put it in the language to make that stop, because you're benefiting from Youngstown.
And through the chair, still fit into the guidelines of the state.
Maybe we got to go to the state and renegotiate.
Something, Nikki?
Chair.
I think you'll see things being done differently. And Councilman, we have two companies that we're working with now that in the contract, we made it a provision that they, work with our Youngstown City Schools, work with the city. So we're making those changes now. Another thing that I think we probably should talk with the law department to do in terms of making sure the skill set is there. Again, we have a workforce center, which is why we're trying to get Flying High more involved in what goes on with the city. They have an outreach of 34 to 40, I believe it is, employers that they currently work with as graduates go through their program. So when an agency comes here, and we can make this part of the benchmark, and that's what I'm saying, when we reach out to them and say, okay, you've not met your benchmark at this point, we're looking at this closely, we can say, here's what's needed, Flying High or whoever, or how I mean, who do you have that fits this? And then match them up with the agency. If the agency is not willing, when they show that they have the skill set and all the requirements, if that agency is not willing to, take a look at those applicants, that then gives us more of a reason to start looking at, whether or not we want to continue this abatement with them. So those are some of the tools that we can use and some of the partnerships that we can use to make sure that's happening without making it look like we're steering as well. Just like they may be steering the businesses out of the city. We want to make sure our city is impacted by saying, here are some people right here that meet these qualifications. So don't say you can't find them in the city, because here they are. Here's the name. Here's the list. We should be producing that based on the databases that in the information we have.
Councilman, you had a response?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So that's great, Nikki. I commend you, and I absolutely commend Sharon on negotiating new things into the tax abatement structure, such as the training programs with Youngstown City Schools. That was one of the suggestions that came out of this Tax Incentive Review Council. So I definitely applaud you guys for putting that in there. But one of the other things that was suggested is that we do as they do in other cities. So if a company receives a tax abatement, and let's say it's impossible for them to hire. Okay, that's great that you're willing to work with Youngstown City Schools to train, a new workforce coming up to take positions that may become available in the future. But for the taxes that you're saving now, are you able to adopt a neighborhood that you can put that money into to clean up rather than, hire people? Are you able to adopt a school, to put additional funds into? Are you able to pave streets? What else are you able to do if you can't hire? Those are the type of things that need to be put into these agreements. So regardless, the money that they're saving, they're able to somehow put it back into the city so that people can be helped. So are you able to fund a housing program to train people on, how to prepare to own a home, how to take care of a home? All the things that we're lacking in the city, how can these companies help with the money that they're saving rather than hiring people? Those are all things that we need in our toolbox.
Thank you. Any more comments? Jonathan, I'm not sure if we responded to your initial agenda item, that adjustment for examining. How do you feel about our last conversation? You're muting still, Jonathan. Unmute, please. You're still on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Councilman Oliver just said. So what can you do to be a good steward to the city that you're receiving benefits from? Beyond, if you're not able to hire, clean up a neighborhood, like he said, do something to be a good steward. So I think it did address the agenda item. I wrote down just about all of the suggestions, and I think we can move forward if there aren't any other questions.
Agreed. Any other questions on this? Or can we go ahead on the agenda? All set. The next agenda item is proposed events to aid in the monitoring process. Virtual job fairs and public forums. Jonathan, was this yours again? Your agenda items?
Yes, it is. The virtual job fairs, we have to, once again, be proactive. We're in a changing society. So the in-person job fairs may be going by the wayside for a while. I'm looking at several different companies that provide consulting services for virtual job fairs, things of that nature. A company willing to just teach me how to put on a virtual job fair. So saving the city money, not looking to spend city money to learn this. Some of these different companies are willing to show me how to do that. So I will be planning several virtual job fairs that feature our companies that are receiving incentives from the city. And that's another way to connect, participate in this job fair. If you have different openings, participate in the virtual job fair. The second bullet point that I have there are public forums. In particular, I receive a lot of phone calls regarding the West Coast Chill Can plan and what progress is being made, what's going on with it from the public. My suggestion that one, it involved people being relocated from their properties on the east side. Everybody's familiar with that. People want to see what progress is going on beyond a news blurb or a news story. They want to interact with those that are involved. And that's my suggestion is, can we put on a public forum that helps address all the questions, concerns, even the skepticism about the West Coast Chill Can plan, as well as any other major projects that are going on in the city. But this one is the first one that I looked at that I received the most phone calls about. Can we open to the general public, virtual format, town hall, and allow people to address their concerns?
Yes, Nikki, did you have something?
I do. Jonathan, as part of your monitoring, have you reached out to get progress?
Yes, I've reached out several times and have not received a response.
Through the chair,
Yes, sir. Councilman?
I think it's an excellent idea to do something virtual for the public to let them know exactly what the status is of the Chill Can plant. Just like Jonathan said, I get numerous phone calls and asks about what's going on there. And I think the public needs to, to understand that the city's good faith effort, you know what I mean? We're hoping that it moves forward, but we don't, they need to know we don't have any particular control over this company moving forward as promised, which is the reason for this tax incentive review council. So I think it's great to put something together and put it all out there and let everybody know what's going on. So, people don't have to speculate.
I think the only way it'd be effective is if we had a representative or spokesperson from that company. And Jonathan, you've had trouble getting communication from them?
Yes.
Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman,
and phone call.
Any leverage
not
from the
received.
mayor's office?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Mr. Bush or Mr. Butler.
Did we not at one time, I don't know if my memory serves me correctly, say that we were going to start bringing some of these companies before the committee? Did we not have that discussion one time? Am I mistaken? Madam Woodbury, are you still there?
I believe. Jonathan, what's the, can you respond, please? Jonathan,
Yes, through the chair.
please.
March 23rd was the original date that we were supposed to bring some of these companies in, but that was canceled due to the pandemic. So that's still the plan with the restructuring going into the quarterly. And we will have these companies coming in first quarter, second quarter, utilizing our resources, being introduced to resources.
Okay.
So that was the plan, but that was altered by the pandemic.
Thank you.
I thought I recalled something like that, Mr. Chairman.
Nikki, did you have something?
I did, through the chair. So when we're reviewing and calling the companies and they're not responsive, and this goes back to my point about sending letters, do we send a letter on behalf of the Tax Incentive Review Committee to put them on notice? How do they know they're on notice if we've not been able to make contact with them?
Jonathan, can you respond?
That's a good question. If they're not responding to phone calls, emails, things of that nature, then there needs to be a letter that goes out that says, well, you have not responded. We've made several attempts to I hesitate to say, but almost like if someone's like in a collection agency. If you're not responding to our correspondence, then that to me, it does not look well on your behalf. And we need to have some penalties attached to that. There should be an open line of communication to any company receiving incentives.
So we've not sent any letter then to let them know that we've tried to contact them and no one's followed up?
It has not come from my office yet. I don't know if it's come from CPED at all.
Sharon, did you have something?
Yes, I do. So there's a two-track monitoring process that happens. We get our responses from the companies when they're reporting their numbers. That happens every year. Not to say that we don't have one or two companies that we have to continually go after in terms of reporting the data, but for the most part, they're responsive. That's how we get our numbers that we put into the report for the council to review. The second track is when there's the additional follow-up from the agreement that comes from Jonathan on the programming side, and then there may be a follow-up that needs to occur after Tax Incentive Review Council has met and there's been some discussion about what's needed from the company. So when we're talking about numbers, job creation, I will reach out to them, I'll get the numbers, everything's in writing. When we're talking about the monitoring in terms of city residents and minorities and Jonathan reaching out to them, it probably would be a good idea for you to copy me on that, Jonathan, because I'm not sure who's responding to you and who's not. But typically I will get a response.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. And
Councilman, you have something?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So Sharon or Jonathan or Nikki, would it be a good idea to, along with these correspondence, send a letter from the law department after you don't get a response, so many times, just to add some teeth to it?
through the chair, and that's what I'm asking. It sounds like there's two types of monitoring going on. Sharon's reaching out, getting a response. I reached out and I got a response. The councilman, I forwarded you the response, and Jonathan seems not to be able to get a response. So if we're all, we all need to be kind of on the same track instead of all these different avenues of monitoring and reaching out to him. And if he's not being responsive to the requirements of the tax incentive, that's where it needs to come from. Someone from this committee, whether it be whoever the point person is for this purpose, should be the one sending the correspondence in writing and letting all of the committee members know, where we are in this, so that by the time we get here quarterly, we know that, someone's reached out in April, May, June, and whether or not there was any response.
Yes, Councilman?
Yes, through the chair. So Sharon or Jonathan, have we ever, in the case of, like, let's say what's going on with Chill Can Factory, have we ever restructured a tax abatement mid-abatement? You know what I mean? So we see that in this case, this operation that we all had high hopes for is somehow seems to be stalled out, right? Has there ever been a time where we've gone back in and been like, okay, so let's put this abatement on pause and maybe we go back, start over and restructure it? Because at this point, if there's nothing going on and you're still receiving the benefit, even though I don't think it's really gotten that much benefit yet. If I'm correct in the way the auditor's office is a year behind on it or something like that.
Yes.
So has there ever been a case, or can there be a case now where we go in and restructure an abatement, or does it have to either be rescinded or stretch out for the entire period?
Through the chair.
Yes, sir, Jonathan.
During my time, I have not seen an abatement restructured mid-abatement. So I've never seen it. I'm not sure if Sharon has or not.
The response
Through
here?
the chair. Yes, through the chair. We have not restructured an abatement. In the case of Chilcan, as you said, Councilman Oliver, they just got on the tax rolls in 2019 and would have been billed this year for last year. So they're just receiving the benefit of a tax abatement. We have the ability to, within the agreement, as I mentioned, after a 3-year monitoring period, do the rescinding. I would have to look into it further to see how we could go about pursuing it in a different path. That's more of I think, a negotiating tool. And so it's not within the power of this council, but we could certainly have the conversation with the developer and say, for whatever reason, we're not making the progress that we need to restructure the agreement as a whole. So that's a conversation that would, take place between CPED, the mayor, or whomever, and the particular developer. So that's a meeting of the minds and restructuring the agreement in its entirety, the development agreement. In terms of numbers and an action that can be taken unilaterally without the company, then that's the structure where we review it for the 3-year period. If they fall below that number, then council has the ability to take it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on that topic? Hearing none. I think we've already done it, but open discussion. Anything else on anyone's mind we'd like to bring up to the board at this time?
Through the chair.
Please.
Just in following up with the recommendations from Nikki concerning the communication that happens between the city and the developer or the company. I think that there should be some consistency in terms of how the agreement is structured and how those companies respond to whatever is required of them. Because the minority hiring is relationship-based and the programming is happening through our HRC office. When that conversation is, you're falling short on those numbers, we have to get back to reset and figure out how we do this. That should continually be a conversation between Jonathan and the employer, because otherwise you've got someone who's communicating as a third party between two individuals, between Jonathan and between the company. Those conversations should happen directly. That way there's no miscommunication in what's happening and the understanding or expectation for that EEO policy and structure moving forward. Again, I think that if there is a written documentation of it, that certainly is helpful to council and to myself, because there is an email, there's a letter, there's something that state, you know, we've reached out, we haven't gotten a response. I don't think that a phone call, maybe a follow-up phone call is good, or you make a call and then you don't hear a response, then you put something in writing. But I think it's important for there to be something in writing, and for CPED, myself, or Nikki to be copied on that correspondence.
Nikki, you agreed in that? Everyone good?
I do, yes, thank you. That way, when we come quarterly and we're reviewing these, we'll have actual facts and documentation of where, you know, this company are with regard to timeline, with regard to benchmarks, and that'll help us make a better informed decision as to whether or not continue or remove the abatement. And one more question, does this committee ever look at the contract so we know, you know, what part, you know, where they are in terms of, you know, building or project management with regard to their tax abatement? Have you ever reviewed them?
Sharon, would you like to?
Chair?
Please.
Yes, I would. I'm glad you brought up that point, Nikki, because that's something that I didn't bring up to the group. I would suggest that we have a Dropbox where copies of the agreements are available to all of the members so that they can go into it and review the details of the agreement. What we don't tend to discuss, because it's not in the report in that format, is we've got one baseline number in our reports of job creation and what companies are committed to. It does not provide the breakdown of their hiring schedule. Some of them front end their hiring immediately in the first year. Some of them have it scattered out over a 3-year term. So the details of that agreement would be helpful for this council to be able to review. And I can set that up and have that in place so that you can access those agreements as needed.
Thank you. Any other discussion for this afternoon? Anyone at all? Hearing none, let's talk about the next meeting. Jonathan, did you have something in mind, or Sharon?
Through the chair, I know I heard a date or a month thrown out. I believe it was by Sharon. What you were looking at as far as that fourth quarter or annual meeting.
Through the chair, that's correct. So what I would like to do is work with our CPA to get a time frame on when we can expect those reports to be done now that all those numbers are in. My best guess is 2 weeks out, we should have those reports, but I'd like to have them before we schedule that meeting. So then I can, in 2 weeks, you can expect that you'll be hearing from me maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later on the date that I've got the reports, and then we can schedule the meeting at that time. So I'm going to just estimate that we're probably looking at September for the meeting, but let me get a better sense of what that time frame looks like, and then I can reach out and request a date for the entire council.
Thank you. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you. Hearing no other discussion, I think we should have a motion to adjourn. Is that how we do this? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. You have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, aye? Aye. Thank you so much for your time. I think we're really making progress. I know it's slow and painful at times, but I think we are making progress in this. Thanks, everyone, for their attention. I'll see you next time.